Well, shalom everybody, welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to continue to look through the Kitzur Shalchan Aruch, and we're up to Siman 9, and this is part 2, and we're going to do 3 parts looking at the laws of Tzitzit. Last week we looked at the actual tying of the Tzitzit, what the actual ties and the windings of the threads, the woolen threads of each Tzitzit, each fringe represents, numerical values of the tyings and the windings, how they equal Hashem is a card, and how they represent a protective barrier around a person. And we looked a little bit at how why they're particularly made specifically for the gender of men, of males. And we also looked briefly at the tekelet, that is the blue thread that you will find on the talit gadol or talit katan. I have a talit katan here as well today. Little bit sort of less impressive looking, obviously, than the larger talit. And we looked at why we have the shamish, that it represents Messiah, or why we have this blue tekelet thread called the shamish, which is in Hebrew servant, and it is a longer thread. And it is a thread that represents the Messiah, and this is where a lot of Messianics have a lot of fascination for, obviously, and get quite excited about. And unfortunately, it's an area of criticism from the Messianic demographic toward Rabbinic Judaism, because a lot of them still do not adopt the tekelet in the fringes in the tzitzits, and the reason for this is there's multiple reasons. There are 2 contenders. There is a cuttlefish and a sea snail, and there's a debate over which one of those animals, sea animals, is the correct one. And there's a lot of painful history attached to the tzitzit for the Orthodox Jews. In Roman times, for example, it was a death penalty to be found wearing the tassels, wearing the fringes with the tekelet, because it was outlawed by the Romans. And the Romans took possession of all the businesses that would fish for the particular animal to get the dye, that actually grabbed the dye out of the animal, and they used that dye to color the garments of their royalty, of Rome's dignitaries and so on. And so it's a very strict practice in the Jewish world not to deviate from previous generations' laws, and there's a reason for this, because they don't want the Torah to slowly change. And while it's criticized from the Messianic movement, it's actually something that should be commended, because it's precisely this type of attitude and unwillingness to change even 1 millimeter that causes the Torah to be able to be preserved throughout the different eras and generations, because of the stubbornness, if you want to use that word, of the Jewish world. And it's something we should be thanking them for, because if the trait of stubbornness isn't necessarily a bad trait as long as it's attributed to something good. It's what a lot of people, the trait of jealousy is not a bad thing if it's attributed to something that is worthy of being jealous about. Somebody can be jealous over somebody's progress and learning in Torah if that jealousy will spur the person on to be more diligent in their own studies. So it just depends on what that particular trait is being focused on. But I digress, and I'm getting off the track. Let's get into it. So we're up to Seif 6. Now it's talking about a particular halakha that was mentioned in Seif 3, which is to do with you shall make the tzitzit properly from the start. You shall make the tzitzit properly from the start. Now, what does that mean? Well, this particular halakha I find is absolutely fascinating, because you see it across the board in Judaism. You see it with the kashrut laws. You see it with even the materials that are used to build the sukkah for the Feast of Tabernacles. For example, the covering, the bamboo covering that adorns the roof of some sukkot that are actually erected at that time by Orthodox Jews, is actually purchased from dealers that from the very outset, these bamboo coverings have been made from the very beginning from materials that it was always the intention that they be used for a sukkah. And so this sort of is fascinating, because then you have people in the Messianic world that very much run on the side of leniency because of the way that Yeshua's teachings have been kind of spun over the years. There, even after 2 or 3 or 4 decades, even people that are quite high up in the movement and, you know, written a lot of books and so on and so forth, they're just still going along to Bunnings or a hardware store to pick up a piece of tarpaulin, which they just throw up and sort of sit themselves under for the duration of the festival, which is quite sad, because it is precisely this concept of something from the very outset having the intention of what it's going to be used for, really causes it to be imbued with a lot of holiness and to be set apart. And it's very hard for the Western Gentile Christian mind to actually start to absorb that and understand why that's so important. Because by imbuing an object or even a room or a place where you go to with a particular type of sanctity, the holiness and the divine presence has more of a chance to actually reside within that place. Today we've got Yeshua's teachings being interpreted in such a way that the concept of sacrifice, which we do see spoken about in the Tanakh, that Hashem really wants a person to show mercy, and he really wants a person to show a person mercy and the other person show mercy, but at the same time he's not teaching that in a way that's encouraging leniency, but it's taken as such, and so to the point that when Yeshua is talking about the widow giving all she had to the temple coffers, her last cent, he is actually venerating that act. And so I ask you the question, is Yeshua actually, is he complimenting this widow on being practical and having mercy on her and using the last few shekels or coins that she had to support her family, or is he venerating the fact that she actually sacrificed the little that she had and gave it to the temple at the time, such as that it was? So he's really highlighting her act of sacrifice there. So you have to be very, very careful. Okay, again, I'm starting to get off the subject. Okay, so the halakha of this is the preparation of something for what it is ultimately going to be used for, is introduced in this seif, and some of its application is presented. If in making tzitzit, that is tassels, one did not cut the strings from each other in the beginning of the process to produce 4 separate strings, but rather he took one very long string and doubled it twice so that it is now fourfold, and then inserted this fourfold string in that form into the hole without cutting the ends. See the diagram there. And he then tied the strings, and only then did he cut the ends, producing 4 strings hanging in the holes as required. This tzitzit, this tassel, is invalid. So he's basically going about the actual process of tying the tzitzit to the corners of the 4-corner garment in a way where he doesn't use separate strings. He's using one string, but he's doubling it over, and pretty much by the time it's sort of tied up and wound around, it looks pretty much like a legit tassel on the corner of that garment. But because it is ultimately one thread, and he might have then gone through and cut it, but originally as it was putting together it was one thread, it is invalid. So the way, people say, well, you have to break an omelet to make a few eggs. Not necessarily, and it's a process that you follow, and it's uniform, and it's you start cutting corners, then you begin to start to dilute other things, and potentially the very observance of the Torah itself comes under threat. And this is where Rabbinic Judaism comes in, because of the various observances that they have to keep it guarded and keep it protected. It's one thing to be observant, it's another thing to actually guard that observance. You have to actually also guard. You have to observe, and you have to also guard. For the verse in Devarim 22:12 states, "You shall make yourself twisted strings, i.e. tzitzit." And we interpret this verse according to Tractate Menachot 40b to teach us the halakha that you shall make the tzitzit and you are not to use that which was already made. This means it is required that the tzitzit tassel at the time that it was made, i.e. tied on the garment, must be in accordance with the laws of the tzitzit. Thus, they should not be made in a manner that is halakhically invalid, and afterward made halakhically valid through some separate act. And that will result in their being formed in the proper manner, for it will still be considered invalid. Because this way of tying one particular string and weaving it through the hole and then winding it and tying it off, it may be a process that's a lot easier, but the process then, what suffers in that possibly easier way of doing it is that you lose the significance of the servant thread of the actual tassel and how it binds and maintains and exceeds the length of all the other threads. It's even in the process of making it, if somebody's going to make it, it's good to make it in accordance with how the rabbis intended you to make it. This means it is required that the tzitzit, the tassel, at the time that it is made, i.e. tied on the garment, must be in accordance with the laws of tzitzit. We just read that. Thus, they should not be made in a manner that is halakhically invalid, and afterwards made halakhically valid through some separate action, which we just read. That will result in their being formed in the proper manner, and it would still be considered invalid. Good to read it again. Likewise, if the tzitzit tassel was made correctly on one garment, and the garment tore, and one wants to put the tzitzit tassel as is on another garment, or even in a case where he would want to reattach a tzitzit to the tassel to the same garment. For example, if the talit garment tore from the hole in which the tzitzit strings are inserted until the end of the garment, causing the tzitzit tassel to fall off, and he wants to return the tassel to its place in a hole, and then to sew up the tear in the talit from the end of the garment until the hole, with the result of the tzitzit tassel, with the result that the tzitzit tassel will be hanging on the garment as it was before, the tzitzit too would be invalid. So if you have a tear, the tzitzit's completely come away from the garment, and you just sort of get the loop that's made that goes through the hole at the top of the fringe, and you guide it back into the hole, and then you pull around where the tear was, and then you sewed it back up, that's invalid. So because it's ready formed, and then it's going back in and you're just sewing it up. So you can see how very precise they are and how very cautious they are of deviating away from the actual established practice, the uniform practice of preparing and tying and winding the strings as being part of the process. So you've already started your avodat Hashem, your service to Hashem, by the simple act of beginning the process of actually tying the tzitzit to the four-cornered garment. And if you do it by any other way, you are robbing yourself of that avodat Hashem, that service of Hashem there. Even though it's a one-time act, that's all part of your service to Hashem. Not only wearing it and going about your religious duties in it and praying in it, but even if you are upwardly capable of actually tying tzitzit yourself, you are to tie the tzitzit in the correct manner and not to, if you excuse the pun, cut any corners. Okay. And then to sew up the tear in the talit from the end of the garment until the hole, with the result of the tzitzit tassel, will be hanging on the garment as it was before. These tzitzit too would be invalid due to the rule of you shall make it and not use that which is already made. Now, if we look at this Safe 3, where it's actually mentioned originally, you shall make the tzitzit properly from the start and not repair that which was already made improperly. As explained in Safe 6, which is where we are now, To explain the Torah states, here we are, this is what I was looking for. Devarim 22:12 says, "You shall make yourself twisted strings on the four corners of the garment. You shall make is understood to mean that the tzitzit must be valid at the time they were made, i.e. affixing to the garment. If at the time that the tzitzit were tied onto the garment they were invalid, as in the case where they were tied in the wrong place and later the defect was taken away, here by cutting the area of the hole they remain invalid." So that pretty much just sort of underscores what I've said there. And if once we get to the tefillin, the prayer straps and phylacteries, oh my gosh, it gets really intense. But there's a lot of work and a lot of precision, and I don't want to use the term art because that would be, that's not really the right word to use, but it is just absolutely magnificent. The attention to detail. It's the difference between, printing out that verse in Deuteronomy, speaking about you shall put them on the doorposts of your house and upon your gates, than actually having a kosher cloth, which is a parchment made of the hide of a kosher animal, and then has the verse scribed with kosher ink, with a kosher pen, with a scribe that was concentrating on each letter as he was scribing the actual letter in Hebrew onto the parchment. And then parchment's very gingerly and carefully rolled up and then put into a beautiful encasing. And so it's a difference between putting one of those up on your doorpost than just doing a printout of those verses in Deuteronomy. It's just a completely different universe, and so many people are still paddling around in that sort of area, and it's just sad. You don't have to. You can. Oh, well, hang on, a scissors is very expensive. Yeah, and so is anything else that's of any great beauty and value. Okay, a third application to this rule. Likewise, if he tied the tzitzit strings onto the garment at the time that this garment did not require tzitzit to be affixed upon it, for example, when the majority of each side of the garment was sewn closed, see above saith 1, where this disqualification was discussed, and after the tzitzit were affixed, he united some of the stitches so that the majority of each side was open, and the garment now requires tzitzit to be tied upon it. If the tzitzit are left the way they were during this process, they too are invalid due to the rule of you shall make it and not use that which was already made. Rather, in all these cases, he must untie the tzitzit and retie them in accordance with the halakha. The same rule applies also in any similar case. Save 7. Before wrapping oneself in a talit, he should check the tzitzit strings to see if they are still valid, e.g. that none of them were torn. The tzitzit strings should be checked daily to ensure that they have not become invalid. This is footnote here. If the tzitzit are invalid, not only does one violate the positive commandment of wearing the four-cornered garment without valid tzitzit, but one has also recited a blessing on the tzitzit in vain. One who checked the tzitzit strings of his talit when he took it off and put it in his bag need not check it the next morning upon taking it out. So not much is going to happen to it once it's in one of those beautiful velvet bags that you can buy. So it's important you've got to check that what you're putting on yourself is valid. Otherwise, you will not be fulfilling the mitzvah of wearing the tzitzit, and you will not be fulfilling the mitzvah of saying the right bracha, and in fact, you're saying a bracha in vain. Okay, you're probably thinking, wow, that's serious. Yeah, it's serious. Get over it. It's just, okay, how serious do you want to be? Do you want to act casually with your Creator? Then He will in turn act casually with you. And there will be a time coming that you will be screaming out for Him to come swiftly to your aid. And so it is in matters where we're at peace, at time of not that Israel are at peace at the moment, but all of us have time to do what we wish to do, give or take. And so what are you going to choose to do? What are you going to choose to do? Are you going to choose to get into this or just go, you don't need all that stuff? Okay. I forgot where I was now. If the Tzitzit are left the way they are during this process, they too are invalid due to the rule of you shall make it and not use that which was already made. Rather, in all cases, he must untie the Tzitzit and retie them in accordance with the halakha. The same rule applies. I've just gone back to the the safe before last. Oh my gosh. I should just look at the footnote number, shouldn't I? We're at Save 7, we're talking about actually looking at the Tzitzit, seeing if they're damaged. We're not talking about making them anymore. In addition, one should separate the strings to ensure that they are not stuck to one another. However, if one has come late to the synagogue, so that if he would spend the time to separate the strings and check them, he will not be able to pray Shemona Esrei with the congregation. He need not check them and separate them. Saif 8, with regard to all mitzvot, one recites the blessing upon the mitzvot preceding its performance. This means that the blessing should be made prior to carrying out the mitzvah, and immediately after one recites the blessing, one must do the mitzvah without any interruption at all between the blessing and the mitzvah. Therefore, after donning the talit gadol, one should hold the talit in both hands, and he should think that the Holy One, blessed is He, has commanded us to wrap ourselves in tzitzit, so that He will remember through the tzitzit all of His commandments to perform them, as the verse says in Bamidbar 15:39, which states, "You shall see it, and you shall remember all the commandments of Hashem and perform them." The footnote reads, "This is in addition to the regular intention that one should have." When performing a mitzvah, that the action he is doing is for the purpose of fulfilling the mitzvah, according to Mishnah Berurah 8:19. One should then recite the following blessing while standing: Baruch atah Adonai Elokeinu melech haolam asher kodeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahatetef b'tzitzit, which means, blessed are you, Hashem, our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and has commanded us to wrap ourselves in tzitzit. And the bait of the word is vowelized with a patak, batzitzit. The bait of the word is vowelized with patach, batzitzit. Let me look at the footnote there. The word is thus translated to mean with the zitzit, where it is where if vowelized with the sheva, bazitzit, it would only mean with zitzit. The definite article is used to indicate that we are speaking of a specific type of tzitzit, i.e. those that were made correctly according to all the halakhic specifications. However, Siddur of Rabbi Shabsi Sefer of Primis La'u, Mishnah Berurah 8:10, however, holds that it is recited with the sheva beneath the bait. Well, I hope I'm pronouncing it right. I'll have to okay, I think I am batzitzit. He should then immediately wrap his head with the talit by pulling it forward over himself so that the front edge of the talit hangs down and reaches until the point beneath his mouth. After this, he should bring up the corners of the talit onto his neck. And he should wrap himself with it in the manner of the wrapping of the Arabs. What do the Arabs do? At that point, he should throw all the zit over his left shoulder, according to Mishnah Berurah 8:4, and you will see some Orthodox do this, and it's quite a treat to watch. He should stand in this position for the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos, and he should say the 3 verses, beginning with Ma Yakar, how precious, etc., according to Tehillim 36:8-11, as printed in the Siddur. After this, he may remove the talit from his head. This procedure applies only to its talit gadol. See Shulchan Aruch 8:3. Thank you for the footnote there. One who, upon donning the talit gadol, mistakenly recited the blessing of the mitzvot tzitzit, the blessing normally recited over the talit katan, should not go back and recite the blessing over the talit gadol. So that's interesting, because the talit katan blessing, as you'll see, is different to the blessing over the talit gadol. One should therefore pick them. It is proper to take precaution not to drag the tzitzit fringes on the ground, as this constitutes a degradation of the mitzvah. in addition to dragging Tzitzit fringes could easily cause them to tear. Yeah, because you might catch them on something on the ground. And Yeshua himself criticizes those who wore their Tzitzit so long that it dragged behind them. One should therefore pick them up. One may tuck the Tzitzit fringes into his belt to keep them from dragging on the ground. Now, notice it says here, so far, dragging, not touching. So it's not, people say, oh, don't let them touch the ground. You shouldn't let them touch the ground, but it's not the end of the world. They just shouldn't drag. Safe 9, the Torah writes regarding the Tzitzit, you shall see Bamidbar 15:39. It is learned from here that there is no obligation to tie Tzitzit upon a night garment, since one cannot see the Tzitzit in darkness. Rambam Hilkot Tzitzit 3:7 understands this to mean that no garments require Tzitzit when worn at night. Rosh Hilkot Tzitzit 1, however, holds that the verse excludes only garments that are designated to be worn at night, e.g. pajamas. Such garments do not need Tzitzit even if worn by day. However, daytime garments do require Tzitzit even when worn at night. All cases in which one is obligated only, according to one of these opinions, are treated as cases of doubt. Thus, in such cases, one may not wear the garment without Tzitzit, but a blessing is not recited. This safe discusses applications of the above halakot. A blessing is recited on Tzitzit only when they are put on during the day and not when they are put on at night. As explained above, ideally one should take the precaution not to recite the blessing on Tzitzit until it is far into the day, that one can discern by the light of the day the difference between the tekelet and white, i.e. if one would have tekelet strings in his Tzitzit, he would be able to see which strings are tekelet and which are white. And obviously that's as it's just said, that doesn't really apply to people who don't have tekelet in their Tzitzit. But if they do, you've got to be able to discern the tekelet strings from the white strings. One who donned the talit katan while it was still night and consequently did not recite the blessing over it as above, or he donned it while his hands were not yet clean. So he gets up, he puts the talit on, and he hasn't gone over to wash natalat yadayim yet. He doesn't have to recite the bracha. He just puts it on, and then he goes to wash his hands, and therefore he did not recite the blessing over it. And then later, when he recites the blessing over the talit gadol, he should have in mind while reciting that blessing to include the talit katan as well, that he probably already has on underneath his normal shirt, which is underneath his talit gadol, which he is saying the bracha to put that on. So he's thinking about the wearing or the donning of both of them at that moment, not just the talit gadol. But if he said a bracha over the talit katan, maybe he put it on after he washed his hands in the mornings, then he doesn't have to think about the talit katan, only the talit gadol. See, this is amazing stuff, and it's so foreign to those of us that have this Christian Gentile mindset. They're like, what? So this is right, expecting us to think certain thing. Like, if you want to learn, if you want to change, this is the way to do it. This is what it takes. You know, everybody marvels at the Baba Sali. They go, oh yeah, he was such a holy man. It's like, well, like, it's not like any of us can't achieve it. It's just, it just takes so much effort and work and diligence. But just one step at a time, and we can do it. We can achieve it. Regarding one who does not have a talit gadol, if he dons a talit katan by day and his hands are clean at the time, he should recite upon this mitzvah the following blessing: Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kodeshanu b'mitzvotav v'tzavana ha'mitzvot tzitzit, which means, blessed are you, Hashem, our Elohim, King of the universe, who has sanctified us with his commandments and has commanded us regarding the commandment of tzitzit. The vav of the word mitzvot should be vowelized with a patak, denoting the single form. One who, while donning the talit katan, mistakenly recited a blessing of the talit gadol, need not recite the blessing of al mitzvot tzitzit, according to Mishnah Berurah 8:17. If he dons the talit katan at the time when he cannot recite the blessing on it, e.g. it's still night or his hands are not clean, then in that case, afterward when it is day and his hands are clean, he should take the tzitzit strings in his hands and recite the blessing of al mitzvot tzitzit. One who slept through the night while wearing his talit katan should not recite the blessing on the talit katana afterward at all, as long as he is still wearing it. However, if the latter puts on a talit gadol, when he recites the blessing on the talit gadol, he should have in mind for the blessing to discharge his possible obligation to recite a blessing over the talit katana as well. The blessing that one recites, so we're up to Seif 10. The blessing that one recites upon the mitzvah remains in effect until the fulfillment of the mitzvah is interrupted. When it is interrupted, a new blessing must be recited upon beginning the mitzvah again. This Seif discusses which events constitute an interruption with regard to the wearing of the talit. One who takes off his talit with the intention to put it back on right away, even if in the meantime he has gone to the bathroom, when he puts it back on, he does not recite another blessing over it. The reason for this is that since technically the halakha is that one is allowed to go with the talit into the bathroom, therefore going to the bathroom is not considered an interruption in the mitzvah. So he'll have his talit katan on, but he'll take his talit gadol off because it's quite a larger garment and he doesn't want to get it soiled. But technically speaking, halakhically, he can take it in there because that used to be the garb of all men back in the day. However, if when taking off the talit, he did not intend to put it back on right away and then he changed his mind and put it back on, he must recite the blessing anew upon donning it. Removing the talit, this is the footnote, removing the talit with the intention not to put it back on right away constitutes an interruption in the performance of the mitzvah and mandates the recitation of another blessing. If he took the talit off with no specific intention in mind, then the law depends on whether he was wearing a talit katan at the time. If he was wearing a talit katan, he does not recite the blessing anew upon donning the talit gadol again. But if he was not wearing a talit katan, he must recite the blessing anew when he dons the talit again, according to Mishnah Berurah 8:38. Mishnah Berurah, same location, adds that one who removes his talit in the middle of prayer, even without a specific intention, is considered one who planned to put it back on right away. And there's many things that can distract you and cause you to have to pause and take yourself out of prayer, go and see to whatever it is the situation, and then come back. Okie doke. 67. If one's talit inadvertently slipped off, the law is as follows. If part of the talit remained on his body, even though most of the talit had fallen off, since part of the mitzvah still remained upon him, he need not recite the blessing again when straightening it upon himself. But if no part of the talit remained on his body, even if he still held the talit in his hand, since no part of the mitzvah remained on his body, as the fact that he is holding it in his hand is not considered to be remaining with considered to be remaining with part of the mitzvah, since the mitzvah is not for one to hold the talit in one's hand, but rather to wrap one's body with it. Therefore, since he now totally bereft of the mitzvah, he must recite a new blessing when he puts it back on. Seeing guys, they've got their kids are mucking up, they're wrapped in their talit, and they'll bend over and see to their children, and it'll just fall off. That's an example of how that can happen. If this happens to him in the middle of his prayers, when he is at a point in which he is not permitted to interrupt his prayers by reciting the blessing on the talit, e.g. the middle of the Shemona Esrei, he should put the talit back on immediately, but not recite the blessing then. Rather, he should wait until a point in prayers at which he is allowed to recite the blessing. Take the Tzitzit strings in his hand and recite the blessing. And I think we'll leave it there. That takes us to Seif 11. And I think that there's still a few to go. There's another 10 Seifim to go. But I think we can do it. Thank you so much for joining me. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you got something out of that. Plenty of things to think about there. And it just instills in us the mindset of the Jew, how the Jewish mind in the perfect scenario and setting is ticking over, and what he's thinking about, and it's so much to learn, and it's so much fertile ground to take your mind away from stinking thinking, as my beloved rabbi once said, and bring it into a place where you're actually thinking and meditating on and planning and rescuttling at times, changing and fixing and replanning your avodat Hashem, your service to Hashem. And you're not going to be living life guessing when it pertains to the talit. You're going to go, okay, I've got clear guidelines here, and I can do this. I can follow this. I know what the way is to go if such a scenario occurs. Anyway, I hope you have a fantastic day or a fantastic evening, whatever time you're watching this, and bye for now.